The right to culture, or the right to participate in a cultural life, is very much linked to identity. It is very much linked to the right to one's own vision about one's future. It is the right to dream and the right to aspire. And it is the right to use creativity and to hold on your creativity and feel free. The right to culture is very much about bringing the past to the present in order to figure out the future. So it is very important that such a right is recognized at the domestic law. Yet, as I told you, this is not the case, and there is a gap there. So another lawyer would ask me, what added value would we get if we recognize this right? And the reality is that through the Human Rights Act and through the legislation, not all aspects of this right are recognized. We know now that there is a gap, and we know that this gap, unfortunately, is not filled by other legislation. So there is a very real need to recognize the right to culture. Now, just in terms of language, using the language, in the UK and in Anglophone environments, we call it the right to culture. Of course, we should call it the right to cultures, because there is no one culture. If anything, this is what the right is about, recognizing the variety of cultures and the right to the variety of cultures that exist. However, in Francophone environments, this does not translate well. So that's why we use the right to participate in cultural life. I just want to make sure that any discussion or any legislation recognizes that whatever we use in drafting, we have to make sure that we're not talking about one culture. We're talking about the right to cultures, the right to cultural lives. So cultural rights has a very wide aspect of rights, and because culture has a very wide meaning, it is really a way of life. A lot of states, and again, especially European states, focus on the right to tangible culture, so protecting monuments and buildings, etc., which is indeed a very important aspect, but another very important aspect is also the right to protect ways of life. So it is about protecting buildings, monuments, etc., but it is also about protecting values, the various values that exist within the estate. At the moment, some of the issues that we try to discuss and tackle at the international level is a big issue, is who decides what to preserve and how. And this idea of participation in these decisions is extremely important and very topical in the decisions that relate to culture. So it's not only about access to culture, although unfortunately we still see at the more basic, if you wish, level that there are obstacles in accessing culture, including, of course, cultural actors accessing funding, etc. But it is also the right to participate in what we mean by cultural heritage, which parts of cultural heritage are going to be maintained, who decides on these parts. At the moment, a current big discussion is whether the state also has to protect relics of a colonial or a racist past. So it's very much about memorialization. And this also goes to the living culture. Sometimes, and I see that maybe this is at times the debate in Scotland, we see culture as static. And I think it is extremely important to recognize that we are here to protect the right to cultures that evolve. And it is the people who have these cultures who are going to tell us how they want their cultures to evolve. So I suppose that the cultures in Scotland also evolve, and they mix and they mingle and they get influenced. And there is no purity in cultures, because this is a globalized world. And I think that this is something that it's very important to be open and forward-looking in the ways of life. And also, we also have to recognize that when we talk about the right to culture, we also have in mind the real possibility that the right to culture needs balancing with other rights. The rights of women, sometimes the rights of LGBT persons, the rights sometimes of children. So there is no absolute right, but this cannot be used as ammunition not to recognize this right. So international law has amazing tools to deal with these situations, and this is what we lawyers do every day. So it's about balancing the different rights. But it is also the right to participate, and this participation has to be effective. And ideally, if somebody asked me, I would really like legislation or the explanation of legislation to include an emphasis on participation. Participation is not just to use, is not tokenism. So it's not just to use one person from that culture or, you know, from various cultures, etc. But it is about effectiveness to ensure that all voices are heard. And sometimes people say, but how can we ensure that all voices can be heard? So, you know, it's difficult to try. And I think it is important to say that it is going to be in an anarchic way. We don't have a way to tick box every single different culture, but we are trying in good faith. It has to be in good faith, trying to find all the marginalized people and take their views. And then after we take the views in order to reach consensus. And indeed, when we talk about participation, we also mean producing culture. So who participates in producing culture, and who participates in having this culture highlighted within the state. Another aspect that at the moment is very topical and we focus and on which we focus a lot is, as I mentioned several times, protecting the marginalized groups. So when we talk about culture, we work with the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and the tools that they have to focus on non-discrimination in cultural matters. There are continuous hierarchies, and sometimes in states I see that we talk about very set hierarchies, but we tend to ignore that hierarchies are multiple and they are ever changing, and more vulnerability is created. So I think that it is very important to not just have a static eye on who is marginalized or who is vulnerable, but to recognize that these changes and also the hierarchies, elites within the marginalized people. So, for example, in the minorities that I focus on, I know that although minorities are the marginalized groups, women within minorities are the marginalized groups, and then LGBT women within minorities are the marginalized group. So, you know, these multiple vulnerability is important to recognize, or marginalization. And I say this because intersectionality is very important and something that we talk a lot about, and I think it has to be highlighted when we talk about the right to cultural life.